authority is still Pinellas County EMS. We still use central dispatches to maintain. The staff added to handle the additional 43,000 non-emergency calls. The county billing is still maintained. We add staff to that to assist in processing. The central medical supplies are still maintained by the county. The staff is added to that. According to the staff analysis, which they refuse to evaluate fire-based transport as a consolidated system, this is one system. This is no longer two separate pieces of the pie. It's not an ambulance service in the fire department. This is one system in whole. We project about 4.5 calls per day based on a truck or transports. It doesn't recognize the 76 field supervisors currently in the system. Every fire engine has a lieutenant or a captain on it. We have district chiefs throughout the entire county. We have EMS chiefs throughout the entire county. Our supervision is already there. It's already in place. We don't have to add supervision to that to make that work. Cost allocate system, non-providers disagree. Basically, they said 9 providers stated that we're overfunding or underfunding them. It's going to cost them a bunch of money. We went to 6 of those 9. They did the numbers. They ran our numbers. Those 6 cities said, no, you're not underfunding us. This plan is working perfectly for us. In fact, some of them we were overfunding, so we would actually have to adjust the money they were getting. Bed delays, parking is illegal. That was said in there. We need to add money for that, another $450,000. It's an illegal activity. Reserves for government agencies and license concerns that were non-scrambble issues, such as HIPAA, which we can train through our currently monthly CME programs that we do. It's probably hit that again a couple times. IPS damages level services. The way it does is the IPS plan takes 23 rescues out of the system. Those 23 rescue trucks throughout Pinellas County handle 56% of the emergency medical costs a day. So how are we not going to be detrimental to the system if we take those trucks away? Now that 56% of that call volume is going to be put back on fire engines. Fire engines that are much more expensive to run. They're much more harder on the streets. So our cost is going to go up in maintaining our fire trucks, and they're going to have times where our fire engines are all going to be on medical calls and not available for fires, or vice versa. You keep going. I think that whole slide. All right. Sorry. That's right. We're on that one. So who supports fire-based transport? Well, the county said we took it to him, just to Mr. LaSalle. He looked at the plan, vetted it for about 30 days, came back, said he thought it was the best plan he's seen, uncommissioned plan he's ever seen put together. He said, well, he liked his plan better, and if we wanted to sell our plan, go out to the 24 cities and the 18 fire departments, show them what we have. If they believe in the plan and they buy it, come back and talk to us. So that's what we did. We went out and started business cities and fire districts. We went to the fire chiefs, we went to the unions. And by the way, this is not a union plan. Not one union member was involved in putting this plan together. This plan was put together outside of that. We were asked to go to the unions to make sure they would accept what we're offering, and they did, wholeheartedly. Who we got support from? The Fire Chiefs Association, the Lebanon Fire District, Palm Harbor Fire District, Pinellas Suncoast Fire District, the City of Pinellas Park, Town of Kansas City, South Pasadena, City of Safety Harbor, Sierra Verde Community Association, Kona of St. Petersburg, which is their large neighborhood association group, Redison Beach, Madeira Beach, East Lake Fire District, and Oldsmar. And we kind of stopped there. We just go last time we're done. Where we're at now today is we're kind of behind the times in this presentation too. This presentation is a year old. We're at that. Where we're at is we formed an EMS committee through Senator LaBella and our local delegation. So we wanted to hear more about it. The county vetted our numbers. They said we had differences in the numbers. We disagree with that. We think they're philosophical differences in how it works. So the legislature said, well, let's find out what the numbers are. So now we're in this EMS committee group. We're actually going to do an operational study. We're actually going to have an accountant come in and review the numbers and find out where things are and what is the best for the taxpayers in Pinellas County. This isn't this isn't something we're forcing anybody's throat by any means. It was a plan we put on the table as an alternative to the IPS plan. Our plan does include bringing in employees from Sunstar. It does require us to have more people. We're adding transports to the road. We've got to add people to it. So our plan does include bringing those paramedics over into our plan. So we're bringing people back into it. It's not about keeping them as firefighters. A lot of the positions we create are not necessarily firefighters. They're strictly paramedics or strictly EMTs. With that, I'll turn it over to Bill.
Thank you, Jim. And obviously that's not the first time you've given that presentation. Thank you for all that information. excuse me, and so the next speaker we will have is Debbie Goss, Chief Administrative Officer for Sunstar Ambulance. Oh, you want to go next? Okay. Grassroots, you know. Okay, next speaker we'll have is Maureen Freeney from the County Administrator's Office, and Maureen is Assistant County Administrator.
I'm going to stand up here with my notes. Okay, we probably need the lights off again. I'm going to, run through this kind of quick. This can run as much as 25 to 30 minutes, so where it really is important to go into detail, I'll skip through some things so we keep it to our 15-20 minute requirement. So if we go to the next one. Basically, what you're going to see here is from the point that the County Commission actually did have a study done, and that study returned, the county staff went out to get some input through an outreach program to different citizen groups. And so really we start with that, and we get into obviously the fire transport model was one of the things that came in as input during that process. But in order to really kind of give you that overview, this is kind of where it starts. So the preliminary report for the independent study was given on May 3rd, 2011. That was Integral Performance Solutions, reviewed all aspects of the Pinellas County EMS system. They actually, as part of that study, independently looked at fire transport as one of the options. There's quite a bit of write-up in the study. And by the way, on the website for the county, it's about anything and everything you could possibly want to read on this issue. Quite frankly, it's got everything, including the Stanford Millikan report, so it's got all sides of the issue. So if you really want to learn about it, there's some good stuff on there. Before I continue, I did want to introduce Craig Hare, who's the EMS Division Manager, who's with me today. But included on the website is the full study. It's about 130 pages long of the first study that was done. And again, fire transport was handled within that. The primary recommendations of the study were that we should use a marginal engine funding, which is really a service delivery method that I'll talk about in a little bit, and a standardized rate of pay. You have in one area of the county, you have a firefighter paramedic making, I believe, about $58,000. Up to a high of $134,000, which is in St. Petersburg. So you have a wide disparity of what you're paying firefighter paramedics. So he's saying, firefighter paramedic, they're trained the same, they have the same responsibilities. There ought to be some standardization because, again, the people that are in control of those costs are the fire districts themselves, the cities and the independent fire districts. So in order to do that, put a standardized rate. So when they're doing their union contracts, etc., they're going to have that incentive to make sure they're controlling those costs if they're going to have to pay the excess over the standardized rate. Again, rationale, fairness across jurisdictions, and cost containment while protecting the level of service. Next slide. The outreach tour was about listening, fact-finding, being open to other ideas. Next slide. The county primary principles were, and you heard these earlier, protect the level of service. We know we have a good system. We don't want to do anything to certainly blow that up or do anything harmful to that. Seek fairness and equity in funding was a huge one. And then implement cost control measures. So again, when you look at the county commission, who is in charge of holding that tax line, but on the other hand, when they have the first responder contracts, where historically they've just basically had to pay the cost of those contracts, a lot of the drive for this was to put in the hands of those 18 fire department jurisdictions the responsibility and incentive to control those costs, because the county commission doesn't have that power to do that. Next slide. We went to cities, fire districts, community groups, firefighter union, other stakeholders as part of community outreach. Next slide. Some of the feedback, and I'm going to not go through every one of these, but again, a lot of the feedback we heard was groups like yourself. Miscellaneous technical and system clarification questions, just really trying to understand how the system works. Discontinue running so many units to minor accidents. You hear that over and over and over. Desire to maintain level of service, particularly to the critical incidents. Get that right resource to the right place. Don't send the world to ankle that's been basically sprained. Support for principle of priority dispatch, which you'll hear a little bit about. And that's basically triaging at the point you take a 911 call, trying to understand through a very good set of questions, how serious is this incident? Because if it's a critical emergency, send it all. But if it's not, we don't need to send all the multi-units. Not overly concerned with who responds, just somebody to respond. And then some confusion over how the response time standards works. I'm going to go to the next slide. I want to go through all these. People wanted to know, what have you done to cut costs already? And over 09 and 010 fiscal year and 10-11, there were $16 million of revenue enhancements and cuts. Clarification on fire service impact. Why not just increase the EMS millage? People said that. Gee, the property values went down. That's why we've got the problem. Just increase the EMS tax. And our response to that was, that's easy for you to say when you're not a commissioner that's trying to hold down costs. So, problem is huge loss of property tax revenue again, but this is, again, a good time to look at the system, make sure, are there efficiencies we should be taking. Next slide. Profit level of the private ambulance company came up a lot. There is a cap within the contract of 9%. Sentiment that having a standardized salary and benefit rate made sense. In clarification again on system design, again by design the system has a medical first responder, which is the fire department. The idea is it's about 25 minutes of involved time for a fire department to go. So you really have fire stations and fire trucks that have to be there in order for fire protection. Those trucks are geographically distributed. You have minimum staffing levels for those fire trucks. They're already out there. They've seen a massive decrease in fires. Therefore, you've got a resource that you can utilize, quite frankly. Let's go to the next one. So again, the win-win scenario, when people ask about this issue, I always ask them, do you know why a fire truck goes to the scene of a medical emergency? And that usually tells me if they have kind of a basic understanding of the system. And again, it's pretty much what I just said to you. You've got fire station, fire engine, firefighters in place already. You have a decreased number of fires, which allows for that resource for first response. And the county providing firefighter paramedic funding augments that fire staffing. So in other words, and let's go to the next one because I'll show you a couple slides. This is a slide that I like that basically shows, because of better code enforcement, building permitting, we do have a lot less fires. So that big chunk of blue is the response for 2010 for fire and EMS, and that basically is 134,000 of medical is the blue. The red piece of the pie shows about 23,000 that are fire responses as part of our whole system in 2010, and that tiny little sliver that's about 753 responses is working fire, water on fire calls now, countywide. So again, the concept is you have a resource, it's geographically distributed, you've got to have it there. If they've got the resource time, why not use some of those individuals to be paramedic firefighters, and they go to the scene of a medical emergency. It's a resource utilization issue. Next slide. And this again will show you the fire truck, where the two red dots really represent. You have the three dots are the minimum staffing level for most fire stations in the county. So by doing this, you've got to have three. You can allow the fire department to pay for those two red dots. You can have EMS funding pay for one of those dots. And again, it's a win-win scenario. You've got to have three for fire. You're going to pay for it one way or another. This way, EMS function layers over top of the fire function, and it's a win-win scenario because you can do both functions and pay the same amount of money you'd have to pay anyway. Next slide has to do with the ambulance. What has been seen as the most effective way to do the ambulance service was, again, it's a separate involved time with the ambulance. There may be some efficiencies that you could gain if you went through and had firefighter transport, but for the most part, it's its own involved time. Those ambulances have got to be offline for that task, which takes about 55 to 65 minutes per transport call. It's basically take a individual to the hospital. You have hospital bed delays, waiting at the emergency room. So basically, they take the patient to the hospital. That quickly gets a fire truck back out into the community to respond to fire or medical calls. And again, the way that we've done that is funding that through a private group, not governmentizing that, but actually bidding that service out and getting the most effective price. Next slide. As part of this, we did have two firefighter transport models. One was a 10-3 proposal, one was Sanford Milliken proposal, which you just